Welcome everybody. I'm going to be talking about the navigating the exchange process in quantum. My name is Stephanie Carpentier. I'm with Worthington Aviation. How many of you currently use exchanges? Okay, good. So the lecture today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the basic processes of exchanges, but I'm going to be going more in depth as well on the costing side and just some of the efficiencies that you can find in the exchange process and core expediting, things like that. So who am I? My name is Stephanie Carpentier. I'm the Senior Director of Operations with Worthington Aviation. And basically my main role at the company is managing the assets. So in charge of the repairs department, purchasing, material planning, asset acquisitions, transfers, things like that. Worthington Aviation, we've been in business since 1998. Our core focus is on the aftermarket parts supply for regional turboprops, commercial, corporate jets. We also have a large MRO center in Tulsa. So that's a little bit about what we do. In this session, we're going to learn more about the exchange process in quantum and learning how exchanges work through some of the different modules, such as the sales orders, purchasing, quoting, things like that. And then we're going to learn how the exchange process affects other aspects in quantum. If you use the accounting module or costing methods, particularly we're going to talk about those. And then we're just going to learn, talk about ways that we use to effectively manage, the process and just some efficiencies that maybe you guys can find useful. So what I'm going to cover is I'm going to just talk about the exchange types in quantum and go over that a little bit. I'm going to give an overview of the exchanges in the purchasing module, the sales order module, and the quote modules, so the vendor quotes, the customer quotes. I'm going to talk a bit about the vendor quote wizard, and that's in the repair module, and accounting module considerations, depreciation options, and managing cores. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know at the end. I have a lot of information, but I'll try to get through it quick. So first I'll start on the exchange types. But I want to talk about the two different things I'm going to be talking about to begin with are exchange types, which these types are found in the sales order line item. If you were to edit the line item, go to the exchange tab, this is where you'll find the exchange types. This is different from the exchange costing methods, and I just want to note that difference. But if you're not using these already, these are very helpful in trying to streamline some processing and just take advantage of the system by driving certain processes. So the first two exchange types have to do with selling your own stock. So the first one, it's the one we use most often. It's exchange our unit, repair core, return to stock. And so in that scenario, when you would want to use that is when you have a unit in stock, you're going to sell it to a customer on exchange. When the core comes back, you want it to be sent on repair and then return it to stock. And when you use this option, this will drive certain things in the system. And it's a good indicator to your team and working between different departments about what's expected to happen when the unit's coming in and out. So in this scenario, when the receiving process happens on the core, it'll launch a repair order option. The second type of exchange is similar, but in this case, you're going to exchange our unit, return core to stock as is. And so in that scenario, for us, that's a scenario where we are exchanging a part, and when the core comes back, we don't want to do anything with it except put it back in stock. Typically on our side, what we do is we typically will send out almost all of our exchanges out, at least for an evaluation. So it's pretty rare that we'll use this one, but there might be some cases where you're selling a slow-moving part or something you have just a lot of excess of. You don't want to spend the money to ship it, get it evaluated. It might have a very low failure rate, so there may be cases where you just want to bring it back into stock. There's many different ways to do that, but that's typically how we use it. Number 3 and 4 have to do with brokering. So when you're buying a part on exchange from a vendor, You're going to sell it to your customer, the core is going to come back, and then the core needs to be returned to the vendor. So these two options, you have two options. Number 3 is buy from vendor, repair core, and return to vendor. So in this option, when the core comes back from your customer, it's going to launch a repair order. You're going to manage the repair, and then once the unit is repaired, send it back to your vendor. Number 4 is buy from vendor, and then return core as is and to vendor. And so this is the brokering option we use the most. Typically, we're going to buy on exchange, get an exchange from our customer, and then the core is just going to go right back to the vendor as is. The vendor is going to handle the repairs. So just understand that this drives certain processes in the system. It'll reserve it to the purchase order, it'll drive repair orders, things like that, and it's just a good way to communicate the process that you want to see when cores are coming in. Exchange transactions can get very messy or confusing, or things can get forgotten about, so I would encourage everybody to use the tools in the system to do that. Just a note on the costing, the option 3 and 4, when you do have your purchase orders and sales orders linked and you're using these, that'll drive appropriate costing in the system as well. So when you purchase a part, that full cost of that exchange will get passed on to your sales order, regardless of your settings. Number 5 and 6 are exchange options. I won't go into that much, but those relate to the work order. And we do have another session that's going to talk specifically about exchanges in the work orders. But those two just give you an option of an internal or external work order. So the next one I want to talk about is the costing methods. I've just seen, especially with our sales teams or things like that, we tend to see some confusion on this side, and I just wanted to kind of go over the costing and how that affects if you use the accounting module especially. I narrowed it down to 3 main costing methods in Quantum. First is your flat rate, and this little cutout here is from your sales order exchange tab on the line item. So you have an option, a little toggle. You can either pick a flat rate or cost plus, and what that is indicating is how you want this sale or this unit to be costed. So the flat rate, we'll talk about that. There's a flat rate and an option to depreciate the core. Now, the depreciation option is a system-wide setting. So it's important that you understand how you're currently set up and how you're costing, whether you're using depreciation or not. So in the inventory module settings, you can see where the depreciation can be set up here. And then the third one is the cost plus overhaul, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So on the flat rate, like I said, this is just at the transaction level. You can choose to do a flat rate or cost plus option. When you use the flat rate, understand that this will automatically assign as much cost as possible to the exchange transaction. And I'm going to go over some examples. But the other thing to understand too, in a flat rate, it gives you the option to override the accumulated cost value at any time. So even though it's automatically going to take the most cost, it gives you the flexibility to put a cost in there at the accumulated cost. You can also elect to use a flat rate repair cost for the cost of exchanges. That's in the master parts record, and there's a default overhaul value that you can set up to be automatically used as well. And then in addition, the vendor quote wizard, we're going to talk about that, will allow you to also relieve cost at the back end of the transaction. When the repair cost is coming in, you can pass that cost on to your customer. So the next one is the flat rate with depreciating the core. Now, like I said, the depreciation is more of a system setting, and this is what we currently use on the depreciation side. This is for businesses who wish to absorb profit loss at the beginning of the exchange cycle and then show higher profits as the exchange matures. And so the system-wide setting, you can set the depreciation split to whatever you like. For example, a 70% cost gives you a 30% profit, and this applies to then once the cost, in this scenario, once the cost is relieved entirely from the unit, all sales will be 100% profit. So this allows you to kind of adjust and pick what kind of depreciation you want. So then to understand where to find these settings, and your system administrator would do this, but in your system setup, your inventory settings, there's an exchange options tab, and then from there you can set to depreciate the cores and choose your percentage and everything like this. The other thing I'm going to point out on here is this is where you can, when we talk about cores and managing cores, this is where you can do a default for your core due days. We've got ours set at 15 days. So that's some settings that can help as well. So then the exchange plus cost, the cost plus OHC is the setting that we see on the sales order line item. Understand that you can do a transaction, in the industry we call it exchange transactions cost plus. And from the customer and the sales perspective, that means it's either typically means it's a flat rate exchange, or you're going to have an exchange price and then bill them back the cost. Just understand in Quantum that this might be different. For example, we only use the flat rate method. So even when we're doing a cost plus exchange with our customer, we use the flat rate costing method in the system in order to write down and relieve some cost off of our units. So that's something that you have to understand from a company perspective, how you choose to do the costing. So if you're using the cost plus OHC in Quantum, the sales order line item will always be 0 at the accumulated cost field. So no cost will be relieved at the time of transaction. The original stock line cost will be put on the returning core. So let's say you had a core that had $1,000. You exchange it. When the core comes back, it's going to have $1,000 still on it. The cost of, once you get the core back and you repair it, the cost of that repair will also go onto the stock line. So the cost will bill, but then you can also use the vendor quote wizard to then bill back and relieve that cost. So just a quick glance at the cost comparison. Component Control has a great example up on their website that I wanted to show as just kind of an examples, and I'll try to go through it quickly, but this just puts 3 different scenarios kind of side by side to show how each one kind of works. So in this example, you have a unit that's in stock, it's ready to go. You have $25,000 of cost on the unit. And let's say you're going to sell it to a customer on exchange for $3,000. So in this scenario, we'll walk through the flat rate first. In a flat rate scenario, the accumulated cost on the sales order will be the full $25,000. And so what that means is that the transaction that you're showing is going to show a $22,000 loss. But then going forward, you have no cost on the unit every time you exchange it. It'll be 100% profit minus whatever repair cost you add to it. Like I said, in the flat rate scenario, you also have an option to input your accumulated cost and edit that item so you can put in whatever cost you want to apply. So then in this scenario, the core comes back, there's 0 on the core. You're going to add $500 to repair, and then when you exchange it again, you have $500 cost. That'll get relieved, and you made a $2,500 profit. So the next scenario, cost plus. So that's when you're selecting the cost plus in the sales order item. You have a $25,000 unit, exchanging it for $3,000, and the accumulated cost will be 0. And when the unit comes back, it's going to have the full $25,000 put back on the core. So you made a $3,000 profit. You haven't reduced the cost on the unit. The core comes back, is repaired for $500. That cost would go back onto the unit unless you're using a vendor quote wizard and relieving the cost or billing it back to the customer. On the third option, depreciating the cores, that's when you're selecting the flat rate and your system settings are set to depreciate. You have a $25,000 unit, you're going to exchange it for $3,000. the accumulated cost on the sales order is going to take $3,000. So let's say in this scenario your setting is to depreciate 100%. So it only takes up to the sales order price. You've written off $3,000 on this unit. You have $22,000 on the core when that comes back. And so each transaction, you're just chipping away at that cost, and depending on your settings, you can show a profit, or you can wait until the cost is relieved until you start showing a profit. So if you have any questions on that, hopefully that kind of lays it out and makes it a little bit clearer on how the costing works on the back end. Anything to add to that? So the next thing I want to talk about was the purchasing module. These are fairly straightforward, but I'll go through this a little bit just on how to set up exchanges, where to find it, how the costing works. One thing I'll mention is, especially when you're brokering or on exchanges, make sure you're really linking your sales orders, your purchase orders, you're converting from quotes. Using all that functionality in the system. If you set it up right in the beginning and then you're converting or setting it up correctly, it's just going to make life a lot easier. So launching a purchase order right from a sales order. If you're purchasing for a sales order, make sure you're choosing the right exchange type. That was the first thing we talked about. Like I said, that'll drive just certain behavior or functionality in Quantum. So this is just an example of a line item on a purchase order. It's going to be the E-type transaction. That's going to be your exchange. When you look at the item itself, you're going to see your type options at the top. You're going to pick exchange. And I just want to note that here, make sure you're linking to your sales order. That'll drive that functionality. And then on the exchange tab, you'll notice we also have the flat rate cost plus OHC option. Just note that this doesn't drive any sort of costing. This is just for reference, but it's helpful if you're indicating what kind of exchange or anything you're using as well. So this is there, and it's similar to the sales order, but it doesn't drive the same kind of functionality. So then in the quote modules, first I'll talk about the vendor quote. This has all the same setup, and really what this does is if you use your vendor quotes and your customer quotes very heavily and then you convert one to the other, it's just going to maintain those settings once you do convert it to a sale or convert it to a purchase order. So in the vendor quote, you've got the types. You want to choose an exchange type and then choose your flat rate cost plus. And then just again, when that translates over into the purchasing module, that's just for reference. But then also note that there is an option for a core charge. That's important, and that'll translate over as well. If your vendor is quoting what the core charge will be, to put that in there as well. So then the customer quotes, pretty similar and pretty basic. When you're creating your line item in a customer quote, you want to choose the exchange option, and then on the exchange tab, you'll see just options you can put in. It's the same. You got the flat rate, you got the cost plus OHC, your core charge, core due dates, all that kind of stuff. All of that will convert when you transfer that over into your sale. So that's very important. And then you can see you can also set your exchange types here as well. So then going to the sales orders, talking about the exchanges on the sales order line item. This is just an example of what an exchange would look like. Item 1 on here is the E-type transaction. That's your exchange. You'll also see the R-type transaction on here as well. And I'm going to talk about that in the vendor quote wizard a little bit as well. Who here currently uses the vendor quote wizard? Anybody? Okay, a few people. So we'll talk about how that works, and but just note that when you use that vendor quote wizard, an R-type line item will show up on your order. It'll be under the part number. It's a non-stock item, so it doesn't require a stock line. And the good thing about it is that it shows up in your if you've got your inventory screen open or your customer screen open, it shows up in the history as well on there under the part number. So when you add your sales order line item and select the exchange type, then you're going to see an exchange tab come up. Once you select that exchange type and then you tab through it, you're going to see the exchange tab come up. And from the exchange tab, this is where you want to set up all your information. If you've converted this from a quote and you set it up there already, it's all going to be there, but you just want to make sure checked it, it's all there. You have your exchange type, and we went through those depending on what you want to happen during and after the whole exchange process. This is a good way to drive that behavior. You have your core due date. That's going to be important. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the automation we've done. If you do some of your own automation or use the event manager, this is important to drive certain things. So the core due date and return date, the core serial number, core part number. The core part number particularly is important if you are selling a part and you expect a different part number back. That's going to be important to set that up, especially for the guys in the warehouse on the receiving side, so that they can find that transaction a little bit easier. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to see your returning core value. When I went through those scenarios of all the different exchange types, those are what's going to drive what your returning core value are. So if you're doing a flat rate exchange and you're relieving all the cost, your returning value should be 0. If you're using a cost plus, your returning core value will be the full cost that the unit had on it. And then if you're using the depreciation, that might be a combination of the two. You just also want to use the core charge amount, the core replacement charge, to communicate if you are charging for the core up front, or if you just want to put that in your order, and then a replacement charge if the core is not returned, or if it goes BER. And then you can see there's little check boxes there where you can opt to create a core charge line item, or include the core charge on the invoice. We typically don't use those, but just know that that's an option there. And then just note again the cost method and make sure you're setting that up properly. So now I'll talk a little bit about the vendor quote wizard. Not to be confused with the vendor quotes in the system, but the vendor quote wizard is actually in the repair order module. So with this method, you can use this for cost plus exchanges. We also use it for over and above charges when it comes to exchanges, and for BERs. And it just makes it a lot easier. In order to use the vendor quote wizard, the sales order of a returning core must be linked to the repair order. So you either need to launch that repair from the sales order, from the receiving. It has to be linked in order for this to work. So with this function, you can pass on, when you repair a core, you can pass on all that cost to your customer. You can keep all of the cost, so put it back onto your returning stock line, or you can do a combination of the both, and I'll kind of show you where that happens. You can also charge the customer, in addition to passing on the cost or not passing on the cost, regardless of how you do that, you can charge your customer a price. So if it's a cost plus exchange that you're doing, where you're going to exchange the unit to the customer and then you're going to charge the customer for the repair, this is where you can either mark up the repair, or if you want to charge them for the repair and you decide not to repair your unit, you can pass on the cost of an eval fee, but you can charge them the repair price and then repair your unit later on. What the vendor quote wizard also does is once you set this all up, it'll automatically create an R-type line item on your sales order. And what this does, like I said, it's a non-stock item. It's not related to any stock line, but it allows you to pass on cost and charge the customer for the cost plus, for a BER, for over and above charges on your repair. And it's all in one step. It just makes it easy. And if you're using the accounting module, this is important because it does link up all of those costs and passes everything on. So it just makes it a little easier. And then I'll show you there's also a functionality in there where it allows, if there's a discrepancy in the final repair bill, Let's say you approved a certain amount and that's what you passed on to the customer. At the end of the day, the vendor invoice comes in and it's different. There's an option there where you can tell accounting or Quantum how you want that to be handled if that happens. And that's on a transaction by transaction basis. So just take a look at the vendor quote wizard in the repair order. Let's say you've sent your core out for repair and you've got the quote back in from the repair vendor, and they're going to tell you that the repair cost is $1,500. So what you want to do, you want to give the approval to the vendor, you want to wait on it, but you're going to go to the miscellaneous menu in the vendor quote, and you're going to go to the miscellaneous menu in the repair order, and there's a vendor quote option. So you select that, and then your vendor quote wizard pops up. And so then in this vendor quote screen is where you can enter all of your repair costs, you can enter what you want to charge the customer, and you can create your R-type line item. So we're still in the repair order here, this is the window. The first set is your parts, labor, miscellaneous screen. So you can enter your the repair estimate in there that you want to put in, and that would be just like editing the repair order line item and entering the cost there. You're doing the same thing here, so you don't have to do that twice. So you're going to enter your parts, labor, miscellaneous, and that's your cost. Next step would be to, I'll point out here first, in the upper right hand side is where you can tell the system and tell your accounting department how you want to handle discrepancies when it comes to the end of the day. So let's say I approved it for $1,500, but then they charged me $1,700 for the repair. There was something they found, something we need to do after the fact. What you can say here is, if there's a discrepancy, you can say I want to capitalize it, which means you want to keep it. Or you can say I want to expense it, which means if there's a discrepancy, pass that on to the customer as well. And then the little checkbox in the bottom, bill for overrun, has to do with charging the customer. So the top is the cost. If you want to pass that cost on, but you're not going to charge the customer anymore because you quoted them a certain amount, but you want that cost to get expensed to COGS, then you're going to choose that there. But if you actually want to bill for it, then you check that option, and it makes it simpler when it comes to the invoicing side. So you've entered your cost. Now you're going to enter in what you want to do with the cost. Do you want to capitalize it, which means you want to keep it? You're going to put it on the stock line when it comes back, and you're going to keep all that cost. Or do you want to expense the cost? And that would be passing it on to the sales order, onto the R-type line item, and passing the cost on to the customer. And you can do a combination of both. Now these have to add up to whatever your repair cost is, which it doesn't in this scenario, but these would need to add up, and they'll tell you what's unallocated. So right now I still need $500 I need to decide what to do on. So that decides what to do with the cost, and then in the bottom is what you want to charge the customer. So $1,500, and let's say I want to mark it up 15%, so I put my price in there, and then once I hit OK on this, it's going to build that R-type line item on the sales order, and that's ready to invoice. And so your repair might still be happening, you're giving approval, might take a couple weeks for that repair to come back, but you've already handled the sales order side of the process. So that's on the vendor quote. If you have questions on that, let me know. But then I just want to talk a little bit about automation. On the exchange transactions, one of the hardest parts, or one of the things that you can focus on to make your inventory just that much more effective is keeping the cores coming in on time, getting them repaired. I mean, managing that process as tight as you can is really important to have a good inventory and to keep that working well. So we do a couple things just to automate the core process a little bit. But I just wanted to point out a couple things to make sure that you're doing, managing the due dates in the system. So when you are selling a part on exchange, make sure it's clearly communicated and it's in the system what the due date is, and then make sure you manage to that. In our system, we have a system-wide setting of 15 days for a core return, but at the company level, you can set different core return dates as a default. So for our international customers, we've got them set up on 30 days. And then on a order by order basis, you can override that and enter in a core due date. So if it's a component that takes a long time, or you know your customer's scheduled out not to remove the part for a while, you can set that up. But just make sure you're setting those up and you're doing it on purpose and you're managing to that. It just makes it a lot easier. We use automated emails and reminders that we send to our customers. The more we kind of put that in front of their face, I think the better results we've gotten, just keeping visibility on when the cores are due. With each of our reminders, we provide a packing slip to our customer every time. It just helps if they lost it or it's somewhere else. If we email them a packing slip that they can use and provide to us, it makes our receiving process that much easier. When a part comes back, it's got paperwork, it's got an order that it's referenced to, makes that process a lot faster. And then we also have internal notices for billing that we use. So when a core due date comes up, we usually take it a couple days out after that, but if the customer hasn't responded or anything like that, we'll send out an internal notice to our materials team and to our sales staff, and they know to maybe give the customer a phone call or a courtesy call or something like that. If we still don't get a response, then we initiate a billing for an outright or for an additional exchange fee. So this is just a couple examples of what our notices look like. These all happen automatically, and our staff is setting up due dates and setting things up. But we just have an email that goes out. It includes a packing slip. It clearly tells the customer what date the core is due, the order that it's referenced to, and if the core is not returned, when additional charges will be incurred. So that kind of prompts some activity, and we've had a lot of good results from this. This is what the packing slip looks like. We made it very visual so that it's just an easy process for the customer to understand. We let them know right when the order was placed, when it was shipped, when we invoiced, and you can see here in this scenario we've got a core due, and then we have a date that additional charges will be billed. So, and then this is just the packing slip. They fill out the information, they include this with the part, and they ship it back. And then this is just an example of our internal billing notice. This goes internal. We don't want to send these out to our customers right away. We want our salespeople to have the opportunity to maybe make a phone call, give them a courtesy call, and see what's going on with the core. More information obviously can be found at theqgroup.org, component control as well. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to help as well. Key points to take home, just make sure you understand how your company is set up to do exchanges. Make sure that's clearly communicated, and that's that people understand the costing methods and how to set up things properly on the exchange side. Be diligent in setting up the data, and then leverage the data and the processes that are in Quantum that can kind of streamline the entire process. And then automation is great. I mean, before we put automation in place, we have people picking up the phone all the time, making calls, expediting cores, things like that. And the automation has cut that down drastically. It's just working a lot smarter. So any questions? I know there's a lot of information. Yeah, go ahead. I think we got a microphone coming.
Exchange sales order, you got a second tab for the exchange information?
Yep.
Is that customized, or is that?
Nope. Maybe. We do have a lot of customization, I will say.
Honestly, I'd have to look at the screen again to tell you if it is or not. It might have been.
Yeah. Yeah, you won't see the exchange tab until you click the exchange button, and then you tab all the way through down to the bottom part. Then you'll see it pop up. So if you're not seeing it, might be because if you do select the exchange radio button on there, and then you tab through that, after you tab down to the to the main information on the line item, you'll see the exchange tab pop up. But it won't be on a normal item that you just add it until you actually click the exchange.
So there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Stephanie's lecture here. One, when you're doing a return or a PO, all that does is a cost adjustment on your inventory as if you manually adjust the stock right now. So, it doesn't go into any suspense accounts or anything like that. So your return core purchase orders needs to be managed manually if you want that money to go somewhere else. The other thing I wanted to mention was on customer quotes when you're converting to a sales order. Sometimes that stuff gets a little kludgy, and you need to watch your cost calculations and things like that, especially if you're pre-selecting your stock lines in the quote. So just make sure that you're training your salespeople to verify and validate those cost calculations and things like that on your sales order item exchanges. I also wanted to mention that any exchanges done on lots, for the most part, lots override the exchange calculation methodology. Lots are managed just differently. Exchanges done on lots are managed differently. And then the most important thing that I personally want everybody to take away from this lecture here is that one screen that she showed that said cost method, where it said flat rate, cost plus. That has nothing to do with how you bill your customer. Anybody that is selling an exchange item and marks that tick box because they think that it drives how they're billing their customer for the core charges does not understand how that functionality works. It has to do with how you cost your returning core. Okay? That's probably the most important thing you take away from this lecture is understanding that that is a core costing function. It's not a core billing function. So that's all the comments I wanted to make. Any other questions?
So how do you handle your additional buildings and your outright fees?
I knew you were going to ask that. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, I was going to say, for those, you can use the vendor quote wizard to do that. On the exchange fees, we would typically, on those, we would just use a charge,
The
right?
main problem we
Yeah.
had until recently with our additional billings at the very least was that doesn't reset the core due date. You can't reset the core due date on the at least as far as I know, without actually having any cores in there.
Yep. So, yeah.
Well, we've begun instituting a little bit of a policy where all we do is just receive the original core, and then we
Put a
rebuild
line
the
item,
exchange fee.
yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's what we just changed to.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm
much
sure
more,
there's a smarter way
I
to do
mean,
it, or easier.
frankly, it's more accommodating to the customer because they're not getting a big giant, outright charge or something like that. They're just, you need it to keep it longer, okay, we'll just bill you again for the exchange and reset the core due date.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think we're out of time.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.